Hi, everybody. Welcome back to English Podcast for Listening and Speaking. My name is Lisa, and it's truly wonderful to have you join me again today. Here, in our quiet little corner of the audio world, we explore the beauty of the English language. We don't rush. We don't push. Instead, we learn through gentle stories, through personal reflections, and by simply listening and allowing the words to flow. It's about building confidence, not just vocabulary, and finding joy in every new sound and phrase. As always, my hope is that these episodes bring you a sense of calm and perhaps a deeper connection to English. If this episode helps you, if it brings a little peace to your day, I'd love if you liked, subscribed, or left a kind comment. It truly means a lot. Now get comfortable. Maybe pour some tea, settle into your favorite chair, or just let your mind drift with my words. Today, I want to share a little story with you, one that many of us might find ourselves in, or perhaps have even witnessed. It's about those moments when expectations meet reality, especially when it comes to something as simple yet profound as a meal shared outside our homes. Imagine a quiet evening, the kind where you've been looking forward to a nice dinner out all week. The lights in the restaurant are soft, and there's a gentle hum of conversation. My story begins with a couple, let's call them John and Sarah, who found themselves in just such a setting. They had chosen a new place, hoping for a pleasant experience, a break from cooking, and a chance to simply enjoy each other's company. At first, everything seemed fine. The waiter was prompt, bringing water and menus and taking their order with a smile. But as the evening progressed, little things started to accumulate. Maybe the drinks took a little too long to arrive, or perhaps the bread basket was empty for a while before being refilled. These were minor things, easily overlooked, but John, in particular, began to notice them. He believed that when you shell out your hard-earned bucks for a dining experience, every detail should be just right. Then came the food, and with it, the real test of patience. Sarah's dish looked lovely, but John's, well, it was a different story. He took a bite of his soup, and a frown creased his forehead. It was far too runny, almost like broth, not the rich, creamy texture he'd expected. And the main course wasn't much better. The vegetables were overcooked, almost mushy, and the chicken, he declared, was rubbery. He felt it was completely inedible, and on top of that, he found it to be overseasoned, making it impossible to enjoy. As the waiter checked in, John's voice, though initially polite, began to carry a sharper edge. He pointed out the sliver of meat, claiming the portion size was meager, and detailed his disappointments with the texture and taste. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat, feeling a blush creep up her neck. She understood his frustration, but his increasingly demanding tone was making her feel quite embarrassed. The waiter, to his credit, remained remarkably composed, offering apologies and solutions, trying his best to mitigate the growing dissatisfaction. It was a classic scenario, really. On one side, a customer feeling they weren't getting what they paid for, and on the other, a restaurant staff member trying to manage a difficult situation. This story, in all its quiet tension, really makes us think about how we communicate our feelings, especially when something isn't quite right. And it brings us perfectly to today's topic, which is all about how to complain effectively in a restaurant, ensuring your voice is heard, without making anyone feel uncomfortable. That story of John and Sarah really highlights how important words are, doesn't it? When we feel something isn't right, choosing the right words can make all the difference. helping us express ourselves clearly without causing too much tension. So, let's gently explore some useful words and phrases that can help you when you find yourself in a similar situation, whether you're dining out or just talking about food. We'll go slowly, and I invite you to say these words quietly to yourself, letting them settle in. First, let's talk about the place itself. Sometimes we use a more formal word for a business, like a restaurant or a hotel. That word is establishment. It sounds a little grander, doesn't it? When John was thinking about the reputation of the place, he might have thought, this establishment really needs to improve its service. It's a general term, but it can be quite useful. Try saying it with me. Establishment. Once more, softly. Establishment. Now, let's move to the food itself, because that's often where our complaints begin. Remember John's soup? He felt it was too watery. We have a perfect word for that. Runny. It describes something that's too liquid, lacking the proper thickness. Think of a very thin gravy or eggs that aren't quite cooked through. You might say, the soup was a bit too runny for my liking, or my scrambled eggs were a little runny this morning. Can you say runny? Again, runny. And what about the taste? John mentioned his food was too salty. When food has too much salt, we say it's over-seasoned. It's not just about spices, but specifically about too much salt, making it hard to taste the other flavors. If a dish tastes overwhelmingly salty, you can say, this is a little over-seasoned. Imagine trying to eat something that just makes you thirsty because of all the salt. Repeat after me. Over-seasoned. And again, slowly. Over-seasoned. Sometimes, things are so bad with the food that you simply can't eat it. For that, we use the word inedible. It means it's not suitable or acceptable to eat. Perhaps it's spoiled, or as in John's case, perhaps the texture or taste is so off that it just doesn't feel right to consume. He felt his chicken was almost inedible. You might hear someone say, the cake was so dry, it was practically inedible. Let's try it. Inedible. One more time. Inedible. Speaking of texture, do you remember John's complaint about the chicken being tough and hard to chew? The word for that is rubbery. It's often used for meat or seafood that has been cooked for too long and lost its tender quality. Imagine chewing and chewing, and it just doesn't break down easily, like a rubber band. You could say, the shrimp was a bit rubbery, or this steak is so rubbery, Try to say rubbery, and again, rubbery. And the reason food can become rubbery or dry, it's often because it's been overcooked. This means it was cooked for too long. If vegetables are overcooked, they become mushy. If meat is overcooked, it becomes dry and tough. John's vegetables were definitely overcooked. You might sadly say, my fish was completely overcooked. Let's say overcooked. And one more time, gently. Overcooked. Now, let's think about portion sizes. Sometimes you get a very small amount of something, especially meat or a fancy ingredient. We can call a very thin, small piece a sliver. John felt he only received a small sliver of meat. It's a delicate word for a small piece. You might say, I only got a tiny sliver sammer of cheese. Or, they gave me just a sliver of pie. Say, sliver. Again, sliver. When someone, perhaps a waiter, is trying to be very polite and apologetic, they might use a phrase like, I do apologize, mas. It's a more formal and emphatic way to say, I'm sorry, showing a deeper level of regret or concern. The waiter in our story likely said this many times to John. They might say, I do apologize and for the long wait. Or, I do apologize, sir, we'll fix that right away. Practice saying, I do apologize, and softly once more. I do apologize. Finally, let's revisit John's frustration about spending his money on something he wasn't happy with. He used a strong phrase, shelling out my hard-earned bucks, kuyus. To shell out means to pay, often reluctantly, especially for something expensive or for something you're not pleased with. And hard-earned bucks refers to money that you worked hard to get. So, when you're really dissatisfied after spending your money, you might express it by saying, I'm not happy about shelling out my hard-earned bucks for this quality. It really emphasizes your disappointment. Let's try saying it. Shelling out my hard-earned bucks. And one last time, with a quiet firmness. Shelling out my hard-earned bucks. These words and phrases can help you describe exactly what's wrong, whether it's the place itself, the texture, the taste, the cooking, or even the portion size. And they can also help you understand the responses you might receive. Knowing them makes expressing your feelings a little easier, a little clearer. That was a lovely journey through words, wasn't it? Each one a little brushstroke in our picture of how to navigate moments of dissatisfaction. But just as individual colors create a painting, how we arrange those words, how we structure our sentences, truly brings our message to life. It's not just about knowing the ingredients, but how to delicately mix them. So, let's gently turn our attention to how we put these words together, especially when we want to be polite yet clear about what we're feeling. It's about finding that balance where our voice remains calm, but our message is understood. One of the most beautiful tools we have in English for this is the use of what we call modal verbs. You might have heard of them, words like would and could. They're like softeners, making our requests or our statements of what we desire sound less like a demand and more like a gentle suggestion. When John was feeling frustrated, he might have been tempted to say, "Give me a new dish." But imagine how different that sounds compared to, "I would appreciate it if I couldn't get a fresh plate." Do you feel the difference? It's subtle, yet powerful. Think of would and could as little cushions for your words. They allow you to express a wish or a possibility without sounding too direct or aggressive. For example, instead of, "The soup is too runny," you could softly say, "I would much say the soup is a little too runny for my taste." Or, if you're asking for something specific, instead of, "Bring me a fork," you could ask, "Could I possibly get another fork, please?" It's a way of showing respect, even when you're not entirely happy. Imagine the waiter from our story. If John had approached him with, "This chicken is rubbery, I can't eat it," the conversation might have quickly escalated. But if he had taken a breath and said, "I'm sorry, but I would say the chicken feels a little rubbery. Could you perhaps take a look at it?" It opens the door for a much calmer resolution. The difference lies in the invitation for understanding rather than an immediate confrontation. This isn't about being weak. It's about being effective and respectful. Let's try a few more. Perhaps the food arrived cold. Instead of a sharp, This food is cold. You could try, I would gently mention that my meal seems to have gotten a bit cold. Or if you want to request a different dish, instead of, I want a different meal, you could say, would it be possible to perhaps get something else from the menu? The would and could allow for a pause, a moment for the other person to process your gentle complaint before responding. It creates a feeling of collaboration, not conflict. Now, let's explore another beautiful way to express what we wish for, or what the ideal situation would be, using what we call conditional sentences. These sentences often use if to set up a condition and then tell us what would need to happen or what we wouldn't prefer. They let us describe a hypothetical better situation without directly stating that the current one is awful. It's a very gentle way to guide the conversation. For instance, remembering John's over-seasoned town meal instead of saying, "This is too salty," he might have thought, or even said to the waiter, "If the dish were less over-seasoned, it would near be absolutely perfect." Notice how we used were even with a singular subject like dish in this type of conditional. It's a special grammatical form that indicates a hypothetical or a wish. It's a soft touch, isn't it? It frames the complaint not as a harsh judgment, but as a hopeful suggestion for improvement. Imagine you're at a lovely restaurant, but the music is a little too loud for a quiet conversation. You wouldn't want to demand, "Turn down the music," but you could gently say, "If the music were just a little softer, it would make the ambiance truly wonderful for conversation." This way, you're suggesting an improvement, highlighting the positive outcome, rather than simply complaining. Or think about the tiny mutt slivers of meat John received. He could express his disappointment by saying, "If the portion size were a bit more generous, I would feel that I got better value for my money." It expresses the underlying concern about shelling out my hard-earned bucks in a less confrontational way. You are painting a picture of the ideal and allowing the listener to understand the gap. These grammatical structures, using modal verbs like would and could for polite requests, and conditional sentences with if to express ideal scenarios, are like soft breezes that can guide a conversation. They allow us to voice our needs and our disappointments in a way that respects both ourselves and the person we are speaking to. They transform a potential confrontation into a calm discussion, paving the way for solutions and ultimately a more peaceful experience. It's about choosing clarity with kindness. Now that we've gently explored these beautiful tools, the modal verbs and conditional sentences, it's time to truly invite them into our own voices. This isn't about rigid memorization, but about feeling how these words can flow naturally from you, even when you're navigating a slightly uncomfortable situation. Let's try some of these together, allowing the words to settle comfortably on your tongue. I'll say a sentence, and then I'll leave a quiet space for you to repeat it, slowly, in your own comfortable rhythm. Feel the words as you say them. Imagine yourself in the situation. Let's start with that chicken that wasn't quite right. Repeat after me. I would say the chicken is a little rubbery, I say. And again, just for the feel of it, I would say the chicken is a little rubbery. Now, what if the food was just too cooked through, losing all its moisture? Repeat this one. Could Mom, I possibly get a fresh plate? This one seems a bit overcooked. Oh, take your time with it. Could I possibly get a fresh plate? This one seems a bit overcooked. A. Imagine the soup from our story, perhaps not as thick as you expected. let's try this. I would home gently mention that my soup feels quite runny. One more time, letting the words drift. I would gently mention that my soup feels quite runny. Now, let's bring in those gentle conditional sentences, painting a picture of what could be. What would why be perfect? Remember the tiny portion? Repeat after me. If the portion were wine a bit more generous, I might feel its better value. Feel the wish in that sentence. If the portion were on a bit more generous, I would feel its better value. And that moment when the dish was just too salty, too over-seasoned. How would you express that gently? Let's try. If this dish were less over-seasoned, it would be absolutely perfect. Slowly, letting each word resonate. If this dish were over-seasoned, it would be absolutely perfect. Sometimes, sadly, a dish might be so unpleasant it's just not possible to eat. It's inedible. If you had to communicate that with politeness, yet firmness, you might say, I'm afraid if this dish continues to be so inedible, I would need to send it back. Take a breath, and let's say that again. I'm afraid if this dish continues to be so inedible, I would need to send it back. Let's try to bring in a couple of those more expressive phrases. Imagine you are the waiter, apologizing sincerely. How would you practice this? Do apologize, but I wouldn't say this chicken is a little rubbery. Repeat after me, feeling the gentle apology. I do apologize, but I wouldn't say this chicken is a little rubbery. And now, from the customer's perspective, expressing that deep feeling of disappointment after spending your money on something unsatisfactory. This phrase, shelling out my hard-earned bucks, carries a lot of emotion. Let's try to say this naturally. It feels a bit disheartening to be shelling out my hard-earned bucks for a meal that's quite inedible. One more time, connecting with the feeling behind the words. It feels a bit disheartening to be shelling out my hard-earned bucks for a meal that's quite inedible. You're doing beautifully. This isn't just about making sounds. It's about connecting with the intention behind the words, allowing them to feel genuine to you. Now, let's shift just a little. I'm going to give you a scenario and then a quiet moment for you to form your own sentence using the vocabulary and grammar we've explored. There's no single right answer, just what feels natural and polite to you. Think of it as a gentle conversation with yourself. Imagine you are at a restaurant and your main course arrives, but it's completely cold. How would you politely inform your waiter, perhaps using would or could to soften your complaint? Take a moment. What did you come up with? Perhaps something like, I might gently mention that my meal seems to have gotten a bit cold. Or, could I possibly ask if this dish could be warmed up? Whatever it was, if it felt natural to you, that's perfect. Here's another one. You've been waiting for a very long time for your food, and you notice other tables that arrived after you are already eating. The service has been quite slow. How might you politely inquire about your order using could? Take your time. Did you think of something like, could you possibly check on our order? We've been waiting for quite a while. Or, could I just ask how much longer the food would take us be? It's all about those soft invitations. One last scenario. You ordered a grilled fish, expecting it to be light and flaky, but it's come out very dry and stiff. It feels quite rubbery, even a little overcooked. How might you express your disappointment, perhaps using a conditional sentence to suggest how it would occurs ideally be? Take a moment to form your thoughts. Perhaps you envisioned saying something like, if the fish were just a little more tender and juicy, it would truly be delightful. Or, I would want to say this fish feels a little rubbery. Well, if it were not cooked just a bit less, it would be perfect. Remember, this journey of learning a language isn't a race. It's a slow, gentle unfolding. The more you practice these phrases, not just by repeating them, but by imagining yourself in these situations, the more natural they will become. You could even try writing down a few of your own scenarios in a journal and crafting your polite complaints. What if the drinks were too sweet? What if the table was wobbly? How would you use would, could, or an if were would sentence? Allow these words and structures to become a part of your own gentle voice. With each practice, you're building not just your English, but your confidence, allowing you to navigate the world with grace and clarity, no matter the situation. And so, as we gently bring this session to a close, I invite you to settle back into that comfortable space you found at the beginning of our time together. Remember the quiet hum of a restaurant, the clinking of glasses, and the simple desire for a pleasant meal. We started with a story, a moment of discomfort for a couple in a restaurant. The feeling of something being not quite right, whether it was the chicken feeling a bit rubbery or the soup being unexpectedly runny. It's a very human experience, isn't it? That feeling of a small disappointment or the need to express something, but perhaps not knowing quite how or worrying about how it might be received. Today, we've carefully picked up words and phrases, almost like precious stones, examining them, understanding their shape and their weight. Words like overcooked fmois or over-seasoned, which, when spoken calmly, can convey so much. We've explored how to use expressions like I would calm say, or could I possibly, to weave politeness into our requests, creating a bridge rather than a wall. And that cultural note about shelling out your hard-earned bucks reminds us that our feelings are valid. It's not about being difficult. It's about the gentle confidence that comes from knowing you can articulate your needs, your observations, your expectations with clarity and grace. It's about transforming potential awkwardness into a moment of clear, respectful communication. This empowers you, not just in a restaurant, but in so many other corners of life where you might need to speak up. This isn't just about complaining. It's about feeling more at home in English, more secure in your ability to navigate the nuances of daily life. It's about building the quiet strength to express yourself when it matters, and knowing that your voice, expressed thoughtfully, is always welcome. If this episode has offered you a moment of peace, a new word that felt just right, or a whisper of confidence in your English learning journey today, I would be so grateful if you considered sharing it with someone else who might also find comfort and clarity in these gentle lessons. Thank you truly for spending this time with me. It's a quiet privilege to share this learning space with you. Until our next gentle conversation, take good care of yourself. Keep listening, keep practicing, and keep allowing your beautiful English voice to grow, one thoughtful word at a time.